Welcome to episode 67 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. My name is William Fizzpatrick, and hi, folks. Sorry for the minor delay in the stream tonight. Had some technical difficulties, as it were. More specifically, the plumbing clogged today. And my parents and I, we had to do a little plumbing project involving unclogging the toilet, getting a new toilet plunger, and also getting everything all fixed up and nice and good. So everything's all good now. And I had a minor issue with Twitter today falling out, I think, or more specifically, crashing. So I wasn't able to get the show announcement out until like about 30 minutes ago or so. I can actually check. 33 minutes ago. So actually, yes, I was correct briefly as to what exactly that was. So, folks, congratulations. You survived Maniac Week. One of the most difficult weeks of the year to be a professional wrestling fan because of how, let's just say, reactionary and insane it is. I did a How to Survive Maniac Week guide last week, which should also apply to any other situation regarding the world of professional wrestling and how you can handle that on your Twitter account, or as I call it, the bird thing. And so this episode is going to basically be a post-Maniac Week show, where I get to talk about the chronicling of a Faustian bargain. Yes, if you have seen the Series 1 or Series 2 shows, or haven't even seen them yet, there are two episodes that are called Of Faustian Bargains and High Seas Piracy, and The Evolution of a Faustian Bargain. This is the third episode in the Faustian Bargain series of, hey, you know that really good thing that we just got that we really like as wrestling fans, but at the same time we're wondering, is there a catch? Well, guess what? There's a catch to it. Now, normally, these Faustian Bargain episodes focus on the Mae Young Classic, which was a tournament that featured a large number of female professional wrestlers competing in a single elimination tournament to get some kind of shiny crown and a WWE contract in storyline. And how much that tournament was going to be a Faustian bargain for female wrestling fans. Sure, we now have options. As much as people like to bemoan AEW's women's division, they are developing a women's division. It's just like I said, AEW is an expansion hockey franchise. Naturally, it is going to be a situation where some ideas work, other ideas don't work, and it takes a few years for things to naturally develop. So, because it takes a while for things to naturally develop, you have a situation where people get incredibly impatient, or they want their faves to be on the top of the card without realizing what work it's going to take to get said faves involved in the top part of the card when they don't exactly have the kind of fan reactions that you need to actually get to the top of the card per se. That, and also distracting yourself with the never-ending discourse of the fans that don't like you or want to push their own agenda and their own card. As I've said beforehand, it's a Sengoku period of professional wrestling. We have so many different people, so many different changes, and so many different insane things going on that it literally feels like Oda Nobunaga would be going, this might be too crazy for me. Time to burn down another monastery! So anyway, for those of you who also saw the alternate title of this episode, How to Sign Your Soul to Wrestling! Or more specifically, How to Sign Your Immortal Soul to the wrestling gods for a nice pretty penny and some possibly explicit photos of your favorite male or female professional wrestlers. Because, honestly, that's how some of you sound like at times, and it disturbs me. So, yeah. Talking briefly about the simp culture aside, So yeah, Faustian bargains. Faustian bargains basically give you exactly what you want, but there's oftentimes a cost, a long-term cost as to what exactly in exchange of the bargain. Okay, So basically, in this particular instance, say for example, you want new champions of the Raw and SmackDown women's divisions, and same for NXT. Recall Gonzalez, Belair, and Ripley all got championships. What was the cost, however? Well, on April 15th, 2021, WWE answered that question with another Black Wednesday. Now, Black Wednesday has been a semi-tradition of WWE over the last several years, over the last couple decades. The week after WrestleMania, a number of wrestlers have their contracts expire, or they decide to not renew them and release them with a 90-day no complete cause. However, they do get compensatory pay for those 90 days because of the fact that they're not competing for another wrestling promotion. So at least until July, most of these wrestlers will not be competing. So, 10 wrestlers got released on Wednesday, and those wrestlers are Tucker Knight, Billy Kay, Peyton Royce, Mojo Rawley, Samoa Joe, Wesley Blake, and let me think here, a couple other ones. And I'll think of the names of a couple other ones later on, but the ones that I want to focus... Oh, Mickie James. Yes, Mickie James. And a few others. Yeah. So suffice to say, the IIconics, or as one of my friends has dubbed them, the irritating banshees, has been by far the biggest of the releases as far as a fan reaction is concerned. Because, in all honesty, it's a situation of entertainment versus actual performance. In the classic never-ending good versus evil versus shades of gray battle that is entertainers versus performers. Oh boy, this is one of those many hotly contested debates that you'll see in the world of professional wrestling, and if you're unfamiliar with this concept, congratulations! You've set up your social media account correctly so you don't actually see the amount of insane discourse that happens every single time that one of these conversations happens. The people who are very artsy fans get upset whenever one of their favorite entertaining gimmicks or entertainer wrestlers ends up getting released because they don't happen to be particularly good in the ring, which is kind of the point of wrestling ring is like, where you have your matches and where you get either your heel or face reaction. And no matter how much you cover up for a wrestler's deficiencies in the ring, there's always going to be a situation where somebody's going to get exposed at some point. Oh yeah, Chelsea Green, I forgot about her. It's probably because she's been in the on injured reserve so many times that I just figured that she had a consistent residency. I like Chelsea. I think she's a serviceable wrestler. But at the same time, she couldn't stay healthy. And a company or a wrestling promotion is not going to push you if you can't stay healthy for more than 5 seconds. And Chelsea kept having serious long-term injuries to her wrist, her shoulder, and I think her knee at one point. It was just a situation where they kept re-debuting and kept trying to push her, and instead it's like, oh, she broke another ligament in her wrist or broke a bone or something like that. Oh dear, we now have to... So yeah, we now have Chelsea Green, who is now released from the company, joining Zack Ryder in that regard. Ryder was released, I think, last year. So you have a situation now where you now have a bunch of wrestlers who have now been released by the company who are likely going to be taking indie wrestling gigs in the summer or fall and will probably be signing with a promotion relatively soon-ish, after that 90-day no complete cause is over. But yeah, the IIconics. I've been vocal in the past about the IIconics being average or below average or just kind of there. They were essentially, to me, the Dean Ambrose of the women's division. Serviceable, good, solid performers who just didn't really have what I was looking for in terms of a performer. They weren't that interesting. It also didn't help that Billy Kay had a voice that could literally awaken every single demon trapped underneath the bowels of the earth. And that, honestly, there was legit issues with them screaming all the time, which made some of my friends who are hearing sensitive very irritated at them. Hence the name Irritating Banshees. So you have a situation where you have two very well-liked wrestlers, and then they did their breakup angle. And when they did their breakup angle, people were like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. The IIconics are one of the few legitimate women's tag teams in the tag division. Why not just have them be the heels to end all heels? But the problem is that the IIconics ran into stagnation. They're too jokey of villains to be taken seriously. And if you tried to make them seriously, then their gimmick would just come off as passive-aggressive, excessive bullying during a time when WWE and other wrestling companies are having to reevaluate how their heels interact in the world. People say that wrestling is not progressive. Over the last several years, it's been proven to be exactly the opposite. You have new creative writers coming in and saying, we can't do those words or those phrases because we know that people are going to get offended by them to the point where we're going to end up getting in a legal lawsuit about it. So, ending up with a character like the IIconics, who are literally the most irritating individuals imaginable as as your typical high school girl bullies, especially when reports are coming out about how negative bullying culture has become. Yes, I know, I'm aware, it's WWE. It's a company that has it's a company based in Mordor that has triple or double the standards of every company, okay? But at the same time, they do listen. They do especially listen to their PR groups that say, this is not a good idea. For example, having Seth Rollins have a social media account. This is a disaster waiting to happen, so, maybe not have that, or maybe have somebody manage the account of that particular person before they do something disastrous, or they end up getting hacked, and then we suddenly have a small package scandal on our doorstep. So yeah, when you have a team like the IIconics, who are such a weird team, I was glad that they broke up. I felt as though that they had had a good, solid 2-year run as a jokey heel tag team that took themselves way too seriously. And yes, the segments with the IIconics were decent when I wasn't having my ears be literally deafened by their screeching. I mean, I was a person who was affected by their voice. Everybody else, there were people who are sitting back, and they are sympathetic to the people who like the IIconics as wrestlers and characters. But at the same time, when they have to watch their segments and go, oh God, where's the mute button? Where's the mute button? I feel as though that you have to look at it from that perspective. It also didn't help that Billie Kay was below average in ring, clearly was suffering from long-term injuries that she had attained when she was working at Shimmer, and Peyton Royce is having to carry the load, and she's young. I think she's only 26. So, having this wrestler who's in her early 20s having to carry the load of this team was way too much for her, I felt. And she was never really able to develop her own personality beyond Bootleg Poison Ivy, I think. And Bootleg Poison Ivy was being covered by another wrestler, I think it was Scarlett Bordeaux, who also tried to do the whole Poison Ivy gimmick thing. In which a time I begin to start thinking that people are reading, especially wrestlers, are reading way too many gosh dang Batman comics. Okay. So, the IIconics, they're very well liked, they were very popular, but at the same time, I just didn't feel the same way towards them that others did. I feel bad that they got released, but there really wasn't anything that they were doing at the moment. I mean, Peyton Royce was trying to generate some kind of desperation heave creative storyline on Raw Talk, or was it Talking Smack? They actually have 2 talk shows now. It's really weird because, like, a few years ago, everybody was talking about Talking Smack as this great, innovative thing, and instead you're like, that's a very niche show that gets a very niche audience, and your general fan is not necessarily going to be watching that kind of show over and over again. So, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So, when that happened, it's a situation where everybody is wondering as to what exactly the heck is going on with the segments. They're like, oh, this awesome segment happened on Talking Smack. Oh, this happened. This was awesome. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but nobody actually saw that segment, or people didn't really see that segment, and you're now assuming that people actually watched Talking Smack and assume that that this is a thing that happened, instead of saying, here's a segment, here's what you think. What do you think about it? And not a lot of those conversations actually happen. There's a lot of assumption that wrestling fans watch the same kind of product and the same kind of content, whereas a lot of people have very busy schedules, so they may not necessarily be able to chronicle an entire section of a wrestling card, especially with WWE programming being upwards of 6 hours long in some cases, when you're having to count Raw, SmackDown, Isengard, main event, superstars, and whatever secondary or tertiary or tertiary programming that WWE is running for a niche audience for that specific viewership and that very specific audience in mind. So when you have these situations where you have a wrestler who's an undercard wrestler have a great segment on a online app or programming, it's a situation where even with the most amount of social media presence, it's like, well, they're getting over. They're not over on the main show. Sorry, they're not over on the main show. And that's the important thing that matters if they're going to have any kind of long-term sustainability. And it's not even a matter of if Vince likes them or not. If somebody else decides to undercut them, then guess what? They're out the door. And they end up with another company. The IIconics might end up in Impact. Admittedly, ending up in the Donner Party of Pro Wrestling isn't exactly the worst option, but the problem is they're going to need to retune their gimmick unless they want to end up like the Beautiful People 3.0. Yes, there was a 2.0 reboot, I think. I think it was called The Dollhouse. Yes, Mia Yim was a part of that stable. That's why I call her Mia Jade Yim at some points. Where, like, Impact characters, they'll have names that are renamed because of the fact that they're working on Impact, and to get away from their WWE names. Not exactly sure what they're going to go with Billy and Peyton. I don't know. Irritating Banshee 1 and Irritating Banshee 2? I don't know. I mean, what, Irene Banshee? And her sister and her cousin, Fiona Banshee. I don't know, that sounds like a decent idea. I'll table that on the I Hate Being Right coin counter over there in case it actually comes true. But yeah, the IIconics. I feel bad that they got released, but at the same time, I was not really a fan of theirs. I thought they were okay. I thought they were serviceable. I mean, again, I felt that Billie Kay was below average in ring. I mean, she was literally as slow as molasses. I've seen people run through minefields faster than she runs through spots. If we're putting the verbal phrasing, fantastical phrasing into effect. And Peyton, solid, but she didn't really have her own identity besides being bootleg Poison Ivy and bootleg Victoria. Which, again, I want wrestlers to have their own personalities in order for them to stick out in the wrestling world. Not just be like a carbon copy of this wrestler or that wrestler. Just have some intangibles that make them interesting, make them unique, make them weird, to me, because when I've been in wrestling for this period of time, I've been in wrestling for over 10 years as a casual observer, hobby podcaster, as it's developed, I tend to usually find the wackier characters to be much more interesting than the somber, uber serious, pure pro wrestlers. Although it's not always the case. Some of the somber, serious wrestlers turn out to be extremely funny because they take themselves way too seriously. Or they're so out of touch with reality that it literally makes the gimmick enjoyable for me. Like, for example, Lance Storm is a classic example of this. where he's a guy who literally believes that just by going to the gym, he's going to be able to beat the automotive mechanics known as ECW wrestlers. For people who complain about Lance Storm not having a character, if you look at his ECW run, he had a character. And it was gloriously out of touch with reality. I go to the gym, I work out, I know all these cool wrestling moves, I can beat this garbage man in 5 seconds. And yet him constantly losing or being corrupted by those around him is what led to Lance Storm's character being extremely interesting. That and Don Marine's uber crush on him, which is one of the most wholesome angles that ECW has ever done. Yes, I just said ECW and the world wholesome in the same sentence. When I said this to my mutant friend, my ex-mutant friend, they were obviously disturbed by that. So, yeah. Mojo being released, I'm kind of a little iffy on that. That's kind of a situation that seems to indicate to me that WWE is starting to not focus as much on their Middle Eastern market as they had previously, because they would have been keeping him around as an ambassador. But very likely, in this situation, they were just like, okay, you're not really doing anything right now, so we'll just cut you, and then you'll come back in like a couple of years here to have like a secondary run. And it scared the bejesus out of the Smarks because they, for some reason, don't like the homegrown talent all that much. Which is like another weird dynamic I've noticed is that they don't like the homegrown talent all that much. Instead of like saying, okay, this person has got their issues, but they're okay, they're solid. I mean, every wrestling fan I've noticed over the last few years has gotten very restrictive with the kind of content that they want on their shows. They just want it to be the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, wrestling isn't as... Why are you trying to make it less diverse? I want my comedy squash matches. I want some big, scary wrestler who looks like he just emerged out of the woods and ate an entire group of... an entire group of vacationers at a campground, you know, and him to literally squash somebody in like a 3-on-1 squash match. I miss like the squash matches. I wish missed the random tag teams of unusual wrestlers trying to band together in order to defeat a much stronger group of wrestlers. You know, that sort of thing. I think that's why I've been gravitating towards AEW Dark more so than any other promotion at the moment, because it fills the thing that I like about pro wrestling, which is just pure randomness. You have really random matches with wrestlers you've never heard of, or in some cases you have heard of. In the Chronicles of the latest local wrestler who Fizzy has watched live end up on AEW Dark, we have Stone Rockwell, adventurer, joining the AEW Dark ranks this week. And that was really interesting. Bill Collier also had a match against Hangman Adam Page. I think I mentioned that on last week's show. So, like, the tally of local wrestlers that have ended up working on AEW Dark just makes me go, oh, that's real interesting. That's making me real interested in your product. I mean, I'm not really interested in Dynamite, but I'm interested in Dark and Elevation. And yes, I know people are complaining. This is segueing into the, oh, but they signed Christian and they signed Big Show, but they didn't have enough cap space to sign these other wrestlers we want. I'm like, okay, I've talked about this before on Wacky World. Some wrestlers do not fit well in certain promotions. Other wrestlers do fit well in certain promotions. I'm not sure that, say, for example, Samoa Joe fits well in AEW. I don't think he necessarily fits in that particular promotion. If, for example, who exactly fits in terms of wrestlers who are going to join this particular promotion? And it's really interesting to me to see just what happens in these situations because, okay, so here's our full release of wrestlers, okay? Billie Kay. She fits Impact. They are very much more interested in character wrestlers than they are tactical technical wrestlers. Tactical technical wrestlers usually last about a year and a half, 2 years in Impact. Character wrestlers, they'll last a lot longer, like about 5 years. That's why Robbie E lasted so long in that promotion, because he's a good wrestler who also happens to have a hysterical character. And for low-rent agencies and promotions, that is probably the more important thing to have. Mickie James might do another Legends Impact run. I mean, they're running an angle right now where Deonna Purrazzo has basically become like has basically become female Randy Orton, and is literally destroying every Legends wrestler that comes in her pathway. So that might be a possible matchup there in the summer. Chelsea Green, definitely possibly returning to Impact, or being signed by AEW, because she actually had a match at the first All In show, and it would be an interesting callback to see what she could do in that promotion. Although they have a lot of wacky wrestlers already on that roster, so I'm not sure where exactly you slot her in. Maybe have her feud with Penelope Ford? That might be a possibility. I mean, she's feuding with the Alien right now with Statlander, but I think putting her in a feud with Ford might be a good idea. Because that seems to be a matchup that works. Tucker, probably going to the NWA. I'll be frank, he's probably going to the NWA, building himself up as a monster, and showcasing that he does indeed have a character, that he can be just as wacky and charismatic as Otis and his hams are. Kalisto. I'm not sure what you do with Kalisto. You might sign him to AEW, you might sign him to Impact. He could pretty much go either way. Okay, Wesley Blake. I think he's NWA indie bound. He doesn't necessarily have the most charisma, but he's a solid hand. And right now you kind of need as many solid hands as you can get. And he also doesn't have any red flags against his character right now, despite him being tagged with the Forgotten Sons and the increasingly questionable Jackson Riker. Samoa Joe. I don't know what you do with Joe. If he goes to Ring of Honor, if he goes to Impact, if he goes to AEW, it's always going to be the same problem. Can this guy still wrestle? He was having a lot of injury issues. He had some concussion issues when he was in WWE. That tanked his momentum. And I know that people want to blame WWE for that, but I'm saying the guy wrestled a very hard wrestling style for decades. And the idea that if he can still wrestle at a decent level, I think he would be good for bringing in as a speculative match. Have him sort of be like the one-man gang or or a Stan Hansen, less like a Maharu Misawa. Less like a Misawa and more like a Hansen or a one-man gang. Have him just be a wrestler that just unleashes himself upon the roster of a random promotion. He gets annoyed by somebody. He has a feud with Eddie Kingston, for example. Then he goes to Impact and has a feud with one of their other wrestlers. It's very possible that you have there. And also, I think he should leave the door open for being a commentator, because he was very well received for being a commentator in WWE. So that's definitely a route that I think he could definitely go. I mean, of course, he's also a mortgage broker, so he could always do that. Bo Dallas. Apparently, he's become a farmer. He has become a conspiracy fury-laden farmer. I think NWA takes a chance on him. I really do. I think that they take a chance on him. They bring him back together with Axel, and they just have those two just be as weird as possible. And that will probably drum up some interest, or Impact could sign them, and have him sort of be their cheap imitation of Bray Wyatt, who in and of himself was sort of a cheap imitation of an Impact wrestler. When they do those strange mythical cult gimmicks, the rituals, the insanity, the dark underworld of Impact Wrestling. Live at the Universal Studios parking lot. I mean, I love Impact for just how bonkers insane it could get at times. Just you literally go, okay, this is obviously not going to attract a lot of viewers, but what viewers it's going to attract are people who like that meticulous, weird storytelling. Then we have Royce. Royce might go to AEW. Royce might go to NWA and feud with Thunder Rosa. Royce may do the Indies. Choices are open for her. And then we have Mojo. I mean, if they turn Mojo into a total supervillain in AEW, like, I know that AEW has 20,000 stables, but I would definitely love to see what Mojo is capable of as a maniacal evil heel, and especially since he was a WWE developmental wrestler, I would definitely love to see what kind of hype that they could do in that situation. Like, have him be a villain against Zack Ryder, a.k.a. Matt Caledonia. But I thought, oh no, my friend, I'm always hype. I am Mojo. I, the great Mojo, have returned to inevitably destroy you. I mean, if they basically give him the character tics of Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls and have him be a maniacal supervillain, yes, I know people complain about goofy character gimmicks. I like it when they scream at the end of their lungs. It provides my solar panels with enough power and energy to power my own house. I want that kind of silly nonsense, because that kind of silly nonsense attracts attention. It attracts numbers, okay? And it isn't something controversial like, all the things that have happened in wrestling for like the past year and a half, 2 years. It's something goofy, but it's something enjoyable for a general audience to possibly enjoy. I want to see hardcore wrestling fans return, and I want to see general audience fans return. If you guys would stop fighting with each other for 5 seconds, we'd actually be able to make something of it. Now, wouldn't we? So, yeah. I don't know. I think bring Mojo in to run a jobber faction in AEW. Have him be like the next generation job squad or something. Or have him corrupt the Dark Order or something. What AEW is doing is that they're bringing themselves back to basics with 1980s style stable warfare factions, and you have a wide variety of stables. It's interesting, they're doing a lot of 1980s WWF, but in a modernized setting. They're doing some changes, but they're making it work. They're not really having a centralized authority figure, which is a plus. I know people are complaining that Tony Khan is getting involved in the segments now, but I'm like, it's very specific wrestlers. He's not all over the program. It's just him and Kenny Omega. Okay? For that segment right there, that segment works. For Mojo, I think he would do great in AEW. I think that he would do wonders for that promotion. And in addition to the fact, he also would give them additional numbers in Latin America, Middle Eastern countries, where AEW is trying to gain ground in the international markets. So having wrestlers like Cesar Bonani and Taya Conti and whatnot are bringing them more international viewers into the market. So that's kind of a smart strategy right there. Like I said, I really am thinking that every wrestler on the list has potential. Has the potential for making something of themselves in this wrestling thing. And, for me, I think that that's very much an interesting situation. But as I said before at the start of this episode, we have a Faustian bargain. And that Faustian bargain has taken its half of the deal. All right, I've given you my half of the deal. Now I'll take your soul. I'll take your immortal soul. And you sell your soul to wrestling. And to an extent, you have your favorite wrestlers, some of whom I suspect strongly you've made a gumball shrine out of them, which, again, is your prerogative and your business, but I'm a bit disturbed by that. But you get so obsessed with the world of professional wrestling and the fantasy that it provides. And it is a good way to break away from reality. until wrestling becomes very real and becomes reality in and of itself in some kind of singular causality loop thing. You end up in a situation where you want and desire something so badly in professional wrestling that it ends up sacrificing something else that you really like. Say, for instance, you now have Raquel Gonzalez, Bianca Belair, and Rhea Ripley as champions. The cost of that is losing the IIconics and Mickie James and Chelsea Green as wrestlers. You instead now have a bunch of NXT wrestlers who are likely going to be called up to the main roster, and now you're going to have serious panic attacks over whether or not they're going to be used correctly. And I'm like, okay, some wrestlers have a ceiling, some wrestlers have a floor. Sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes things do work out, but you're never really sure as to what exactly is going to happen. And you wonder just exactly what is going on at that particular moment in time. How exactly can you do what you can do in this situation to not have your soul literally sold to the wrestling gods? Well, the simple answer is that I don't play favorites with people. If somebody I like gets pushed into a position that I feel is good, I'm like, okay, great, cool. I'm going to go watch these other wrestlers too, okay? I have multiple wrestlers that I usually watch at the same time, and I think that, okay, this one's good. Okay, this one's average. Okay, this one's terrible. Oh, this one's great. Okay, let's see how they do. I have multiple wrestlers that I usually put into a cycle of a rotation and see what exactly they're doing as far as their character goes. Now, if they stall out, get injured, or have some other kind of thing happen to them, then that changes, obviously. If you have a singular fave that you're really obsessed about, then that makes it a little bit more difficult for you to adjust when that favorite wrestler ends up not being booked the way you want them to from how you perceive their talent level. And if creative could just get out of their own way, or this will get out of their way, I'm like, okay, but there are limitations to which that wrestler has. Whether it be physical injuries, charisma issues, performance against other wrestlers, the ability to actually work with other people. Wrestling is not just a singular entity trying to make something of themselves. It is a team effort. It is literally a team sport where you have two people or more go against one another in a wrestling ring and try to see if you can make something happen. So then you end up in these situations where you get so desperate to see that person succeed that you literally sign yourself away on a Faustian bargain, and then suddenly that thing happens. You get so obsessed that you signed a Faustian bargain, and that wrestler gets exactly what you desire of them. But what is the cost? Because in the world of the equivalent exchange, what is the price for a wrestler to gain a championship? What are you willing to sacrifice to make that happen? And that's what happens. Either another wrestler that you like ends up getting released, or something else happens. Who knows how much that Faustian bargain, that Faustian demon, is going to take from you. Because sooner rather than later, all your favorites get affected. And all you're left with is the one favorite, but now you're suddenly not interested in them all that much. They've either gotten stale as a character, or their storylines have ended, and the natural cycle of progression from storyline to contender to champion, they're now on their 9th championship defense, and you want them to drop the belt to somebody. Anybody, even the one wrestler that you seriously hate. You get into that situation, and what ends up happening is that you end up in these situations where now suddenly you're stuck. You're not sure what to do anymore. Okay, at that point, ease back. Try to watch some wrestling on the undercard. I think that's part of the reason as to why I've stayed so sane for so long in wrestling is I usually just start watching wrestlers in the undercard. I mean, It's like, oh, this person has such a great future in the world of professional wrestling. I'm like, the future is unwritten. It is uncertainty. You don't know where this wrestler is going to end up. This could be as high as they go. And for me, it's a situation where I'm like, I want to see what kind of potential they have. I'm not going to guarantee if this person is going to be able to succeed or fail in this particular spot. Let's see what they can do, and let's be a bit patient. Oh, obviously, people have different levels of patience for how their favorite wrestlers, and more specifically, this is becoming a fan conversation, because as far as wrestlers judging other wrestlers is concerned, I'm not sure what goes through their minds at times. I think some of them are so stuck in the past, the present, or stuck in this weird futurism where they really want this thing to work and they really want the fans to embrace this thing, but it's not ready yet. You haven't done enough to sell them on this product because you're constantly trying to con them on this product. I think an honest sell of what you're trying to do is usually the best way to get people's attention to actually buy your product or buy into it. Okay? Go, okay, we know that you like these certain kind of wrestlers, so we're going to be pushing them on tonight's card and see which ones you like. Okay? Give us your feedback here. A lot of times it feels like there's all sorts of these secretive cults in professional wrestling who are trying to dictate who, what, where, and why. Whereas I'm like, could you get a proper structure going first before you do anything like that? I mean, it's not that hard. It's in every single kind of economic business plan imaginable. Yes, including the socialist kind, regardless if you think capital, social, modular isms, whatever sort of economic system or social system you have in place, you need to think about it. Okay, what is going to sell this product to people for them to want to watch this product? You know, regardless of if you're a WWE diehard, an AEW fan, a survivor of the Donner Party of the original Donner Party of Professional Wrestling, a Ring of Honor stalwart, a NWA fan, all 15 of you, and or the indies. Everybody is having to come to terms with reality over the last couple of months to years, whereas I'm like, I knew that this stuff might happen. I knew that this stuff might happen because it's always a possibility. You have to think of the logical possibilities, the cause and the effect. Okay, the cause. A bunch of newcomer professional wrestlers end up getting signed and pushed into championship caliber face positions, which in reality they basically are ending up in a cycle position where they're having to face against a wide variety of challengers, and they may inevitably end up losing that championship to one of those challengers, or end up having one of those people end up turning on them. The idea that certain things, like for example, people are now really against Dakota Kai possibly turning against Gonzalez because she won the NXT Championship. Okay, but how exactly are you going to continue the story of Gonzalez and Kai, okay, without them inevitably feuding with one another? I'll leave that question open-ended for you, but you might have noticed that you now suddenly have a very limited scope of stories that you now tell with these people. In addition to the fact that Kai herself is rather limited in what she can accomplish on the WWE level, and if she goes back to the indies, there really isn't anything there. Now, is there? Because this is a girl that has a history of injuries. She has had more ACL injuries than anybody else on that roster, barring Tegan Nox, who has apparently inherited more than just Kenji Muto's shining wizard. She has also apparently inherited somehow through some kind of great mood of blood ritual, Kenji's knee issues, which are very well documented. So, yeah. I wanted to talk about this Faustian bargain. how people seem to constantly end up in these cycles where they end up signing away their literal soul in order for these things to happen, in order for these fantasies to happen in these situations. I go from a neutral perspective. I like wrestlers. I like certain wrestlers. I dislike a lot of wrestlers. I hate some wrestlers to an extent, or despise them. But at the same time, I know that they are just one piece of this gigantic 1,000 piece puzzle set that might be missing a few pieces. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be ideal. But there are going to be occasions where that magic suddenly happens and everything clicks into place for one night, or one day, or one spectacle of a match. And you're like, oh, cool, this is great. It actually works as... That's a phrase I was thinking of. Works as intended. If it is working as intended, and I know video game fans are now suddenly freaking out that I'm using that phrasing, working as intended. It works as intended. The face is getting the right kind of heat. The heel's getting the right kind of heat. The match has the right kind of flow. The spots have the right kind of flow. The start angle and the end angle end up working as correctly as possible. Everything goes as planned. So stuff like that. And you don't have to sign away your soul in order for something to happen for one of your favorite wrestlers. I think having multiple favorite wrestlers is a pretty good idea. And not just obsessing over one wrestler and building statues of them. Because as I've said before in Wacky World of Wrestling, I don't necessarily believe in idolism. I believe in that second code. Thou shalt not believe in idols. And it's something I very strongly believed in, as far as professional wrestling is concerned. Sure, wrestlers will represent themselves as champions and gods and destroyers, but they're just humans. They're people who are in these unenviable positions at times where they now suddenly have a massive following of devoted followers. And those followers will literally do anything. And I certainly do mean anything to make sure that that god or goddess or whatever thing that they are worshiping ends up staying at the very top or head of the table. Yes, I just made a sort of semi-biblical reference to Roman Reigns stands. Kind of cool, huh? Okay, folks, so that was the Chronicles of a Faustian Bargain. I've been at this show for over 47 minutes and 39 seconds, even with the technical delays. Everything is working at the house fine. The plumbing hasn't exploded. Knocks on wood. And this has been the 4th show that I have done since my return to streaming. I've managed to cut back on the time a little bit, which is great. I probably will have a longer show next week, potentially. Depends on how everything works out. But I'll definitely have some more news, some more takes and stuff like that. As far as other releases are concerned, there will probably be some NXT releases coming within the next week or so. And I know that there's also, a lot of angry reaction to certain wrestlers who have had legal issues and been just problematic overall not being released yet. Patience. Some of them are going through legal issues right now, and the last thing that any of these companies want to end up in is a long-term defamation lawsuit. But, as I've said, we'll see what happens. Again, I'm a very patient soul. I wait and see what exactly is going to happen in these situations before I actually comment on them. In some cases, I'll actually break a story. In other cases, I'll wait for a couple weeks before, to get more information on that particular topic. But yeah, okay. We now have ourselves another situation where people have become devoted to either a wrestler or a company or anything like that. But I will say this in this situation to close out the Faustian things. Okay? Indie fans, stop chastising the WWE and AEW lifers at this point for stuff that's happened that has also happened in your scene. You getting devoted, you ending up propping up everything, a person or company or promotion, when you don't know the whole story and if that person may or may not end up becoming the very monster that you hate. Because there have been quite a number of independent wrestling promoters who have started ending up a lot like Vince now, haven't they? Or Tony, or Vince, Tony, the late Jim Crockett, Vern Gagne, Fritz von Erich, Stu Hart, and any of the others, okay? Any of the others. That includes everybody. Men, women, LGBTers, anybody who's been a pro wrestling promoter and has reached over into the dark side of the wrestling force. They've done the same kind of carny nonsense. And for those of you yelling that pro wrestling never changes, oh, pro wrestling is changing. Just not in the way that your little fantasy life expects it's going to. Because some of those changes will very likely resolve in you having the spotlight put on your actions and what you've done in the world of wrestling, whether it be good or ill. And thou shalt be judged, and thou shalt be sentenced. And whether you end up in the internet purgatory, or the mines of Moria, or whatever, or more specifically, the mines of Impact. Not Moria. Moria is too good for you. The internal purgatory of the Forbidden Door known as Impact Wrestling. I do love how Impact Wrestling ends up being purgatory in some cases. Now, for some wrestlers, it's great for them, because it allows them to act, do acts that they weren't previously able to do in other promotions, as I said beforehand. But let's see what happens, because I think that we're all having a real coming to reality moment for wrestling over the last year or so, and we've had this natural, and all of it's being publicly broadcast, which again I have to ask, why? Why are these emotions being publicly broadcast on a social media app that is known for reactive at best and complete and utter decimation and immolation at worst? But yeah, you can go to wrestling Twitter and you can see all this drama playing out in real time. You can even make storylines about it. Chronicling all of this sort of stuff. Because as I've said beforehand, I studied the bird thing. It's fascinating to me. Other people, they like to focus on the socioeconomics of stuff, and that's great for them, If you look at stuff like Wrestlenomics, which, again, I highly recommend that you get yourself educated on the world of professional wrestling from a financial perspective. You may not necessarily like everything that Brandon has to say about it, but Brandon Thurston is one of the wrestlers who has really dived into the economic ratings, nature, and statistics of professional wrestling. So, yeah, go look at Wrestlenomics. But if you want to look at the social stuff, the social reactions to professional wrestling, hi, I'm Fizz. Let me give you a guidebook. Get out your notepad, get out some popcorn, and your favorite fizzy drink. Non-alcoholic, of course. And let's just start chronicling down the world of professional wrestling. Who's saying the truth? Who's lying? Who's being an honest liar? Honest liar is somebody who's telling a half-truth and a half-lie, by the way. Here's your little lesson of the day. And to understand the social studying of professional wrestling, you can come here to Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. This has been episode 67 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. It's just been the Chronicles of a Faustian Bargain, or the alternate title, How to Sign Your Soul to Wrestling. This has been William Fizzpatrick. I thank you all for tuning in on this edition of the show. Once again, I'm still trying to get the rust off. I'm trying to make sure that everything is working as intended. Some of the streaming stuff happened. I had a show delay for about an hour because of, once again, the issues with the plumbing. All of that's resolved right now. I should be back next week at the regularly scheduled time at 8 p.m. EST. If not, I'll end up on 8:30 or 9. And if you are interested in my social media and other stuff, let me tell you what I have. You can follow me on Twitter at Fizzpatrick14. That's Fizzpatrick 14 under the William Fitzpatrick Twitter account or Fizzpatrick14 account. I also have a spring store called Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. That's spring.com/Wacky World of Wrestling. I am selling t-shirts. Yes, I'm actually selling t-shirts. I started the store back in August. I should probably have a link in the description of the video after this video is done publishing. And yeah, I opened up a spring store back in August. I was actually planning on returning back in August of 2020, but I had to delay the show for several months, half a month because of the about 6 months to almost a year because of the technical difficulty issues I was having. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in to this edition of the show. I hope it wasn't as rambly or odd as it was. I'll see how it sounds when I shut down this stream. But yeah, I stream every Friday at 8 p.m. EST, or more specifically, or if it's delayed, at 9 p.m. EST. And I will announce beforehand if I have any delays, so that you all know. But if you haven't catched the stream live, then okay. Thank you all for watching, for seeing this particular stream. And I will see you on the next edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Next week, I am not, again, all the topics that I have right now as far as Wacky World of Wrestling is concerned have all just been coming off of the top of my head. This week I wanted to talk about Black Wednesday and see how, folks were feeling about that. I mean, there's been a lot of positive and a lot of very negative reaction to it, but okay, I'll give my thoughts on it. And we'll see where things go from here. There should be a Sumo Bash show coming up in, I think, May. Yes, the May Bash show is going to be coming up. I'll probably be doing some coverage on it eventually, or doing some coverage with Shooting the Breeze. And also, George, made of Two Guys, One Sport, made a milestone this week. He made it to 200 episodes. Congrats, dude. Congratulations. If you're listening to this end of the broadcast, congrats. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in on this edition of the show. Let me know what you think, either on the Bird thing or any of the other apps that I use for posting these episodes. And I'll see you for the next edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good day or night, and I'll catch you next week or so. I might have some other projects in the works here that may end up happening. Just letting you know that ahead of time. So anyway, have a good day or night, folks, and I'll see you for the next edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. The Chronicles of a Faustian Bargain, Episode 67, is a wrap. Bye, folks!